believe it. I don't think I'd ever look at that and not know that again. So it's really, that's,
Yeah. So there's so much history.
yeah.
Good morning. Hey. So I think we're going to do is we're going to start on the bottom of Vav Amud Aleph. And we have one more, I guess, one more day of conversation to talk about the Rakia, the firmament.
Rabbi, considering starting earlier, we talked about that.
We had talked about it.
It's hard to cover much ground.
Yeah, I would consider it. The goal here is to my goal wasn't to be able to cover a certain amount per day, like a Daf Yomi share. So I'm open to starting earlier if that's the consensus. Talk among yourselves and let me know what your preference would be. If you'd rather start at 6, I'm happy to accommodate.
Not much interest, okay. Doesn't matter to me whether I set my alarm clock 10 minutes earlier or not, but some people
Yeah,
feel
okay.
otherwise. So, yeah. Raised and lowered, I think.
We should put on the shot to get feel.
Okay.
That's the best
Yeah,
way to
we
do
can
it.
definitely take a poll. Okay, so what we were learning about was this whole discussion, this very esoteric discussion about the rakia, the firmament that the Torah describes that God created on the second day of creation. Remember, the first day is Bereshit bara Elokim eis hashamayim ve'eis haaretz. In the beginning, God creates heaven and earth. But there's something else that God puts into place into the heavens on the second day of creation, a rakia. Now, as we explained all along, the medieval belief is that a firmament is actually a dome that covers our planet, and that's where the sun at night, when the sun disappears, it leaves the dome. There were two beliefs, not discussed in this Gemara, where the sun goes at night. One belief was that it goes above the dome in the opposite direction to get back to the east. So it rises in the east, goes inside the dome, travels on a westerly trajectory for the entire day, then sets, then leaves the dome on the west side, comes up and goes above the dome to get back to the east.
That's why we can't see it.
That's why you can't see it, because the dome is like is a sheath. The other opinion was that it goes underneath the planet, and so it's always constantly going in a counterclockwise rotation, right, from man's perspective. But at night it leaves the dome, goes under the planet, and then comes back inside the dome.
I think on the second one, it wouldn't have to leave the dome because we wouldn't be able to see it regardless.
Well, we don't know how far the dome extends. We don't know if the dome is a dome that goes all around the planet so that it's a sphere, or whether it's a hemisphere. We're not really sure. We're not really sure according to that opinion.
The first opinion would allow a flat Earth scenario.
It would allow a flat Earth scenario, yeah. So yes. Anyway, so we had many different opinions as far as what is the thickness of this rakia. We had originally started by saying that it is as thick as it takes to travel for 50 years, assuming that a person walks for a full day, and travels for 50 and walks, does that for 50 years. So that's the thickness of the rakia. I think we said that was the thickness, was that the thickness of the planet Earth? That was the diameter of the planet Earth. Then there was an opinion that the thickness of the rakia is the same thickness as the trajectory of the sun over the course of the day, which is how long it takes a person to walk if he were to walk, with the distance of how much distance a person would cover if he would walk for 500 years. That was the last opinion that we saw. And then we had just started to see, before we broke for Pesach, is that now we have the opinion of Rebbe Yehoshua. And the opinion of Rebbe Yehoshua, the very bottom line of Vav Amud Aleph, was Tani B'Shem Rebbe Yehoshua, Ovio Shel Rakia Kishtei Etzba'ayim, that the thickness of the rakia is 2 fingers width thickness. 2 fingers width, which is a huge difference between 50 or 500 years. Okay, so this is the thickness of 2 fingers, right? So it's about an inch, I guess you would say. And we had seen, before we broke, we took a look at the Gemara in Chagiga, in the Talmud Bavli, and we had seen that the opinion, this is consistent to some degree to the opinion of Ben Zoma in the Talmud Bavli, who had said that the thickness of the rakia is 3 fingers breadth. And the Chachamim at that time had disagreed with Ben Zoma. They had said, Adayin Ben Zoma mi bachutz. Ben Zoma is still on the outside, which means he hasn't penetrated the deepest esoteric secrets of the Pardes. That was the context of that discussion. Because for a person to think that there is a 3-finger or 2-finger breadth distance between this terrestrial existence and the celestial or heavenly existence that's beyond the rakia, is to create too much of a divide between thinking that there are actually 2 different realities, when actually the realities are divided by something which is as thin as, let's say, an onion skin, or the width between the hair's breadth, or the Gemara had said the distance between 2 planks on a tightly planked bridge, right? And a couple of other examples. So, and then we had explained at that time that the Talmud Bavli is trying to portray the rakia as being super, super thin, because it wants to portray for us that the difference between the terrestrial realm and the celestial realm is really an illusion. That really the difference between the two is just from human perspective, because the human mind has limitations to not be able to see past the rakia, but it's really sort of because you're in the matrix, or or whatever analogy you want to be able to use. So that's that's what we saw last time. Okay, now we turn the page, and now we're going to see another opinion as to the thickness of the rakia. Milse de Rebbe Chanina pliga. So the following words of Rebbe Chanina are going to disagree with Rebbe Yehoshua before, who said that the thickness of the rakia is 2 fingers width. Da'amar Rebbe Acha b'shem Rebbe Chanina, as Rebbe Acha said in the name of Rebbe Chanina, and we're basing now our words on a cryptic passage from the book of Iyov. A lot of the book of Iyov is cryptic, but it's descriptive of God's universe. And the verse is, Tarkia imo lishechakim, you shall, and here the verse is taking the word rakia and turning it into a verb. You will be rakia with him in the heavens. Chazakim, they are strong, referring to ostensibly the rakia itself. Kirei mutzak, like a freshly poured mirror. Now remember, in the ancient and medieval world, how did they fashion mirrors? Copper or silver, and they would polish it and polish it and polish it until it was very, very shiny and reflective. Just like, the chrome that you have on on an old fancy car, right? And you can see your reflection in it. That's how the old mirrors were made. They didn't have the technology of a pane of glass covered on one side by mercury. They did that technology didn't, I don't know, someone probably can Google it or chat GPT it to find out when did the technology change in mirror manufacturing from polished metal to glass and mercury. Okay, but that's so the rakia here is being described as kirei mutzak, as a freshly poured metal mirror that has just been freshly poured and solidified and then polished up to make it really shiny and reflective. The lashon, so tarkia. So what does that mean, tarkia? You shall rakia it, meaning that it's descriptive of God's fashioning of the rakia. Melamed shehin asuyin ketas. This teaches us that the heavens are made like a very thin, uh, uh, flat piece of metal. That's what a tas is. A tas is like a piece of sheet metal, and therefore it's even thinner than one finger's breadth. That's at least how the Charedim understands it. Okay, and then Rabbi Chanina continues. So therefore, Rabbi Yehoshua was of the opinion that the rakia has a certain thickness to it, maybe 2 fingers breadth. But Rabbi Chanina says, more consistent with what we learned in the Bavli, that it's super thin, even thinner than two fingers breadth. Yochel she'enon brian, you might think that because of their thinness, the rakia is not strong or sturdy, because if it's like a piece of aluminum foil, which is what I guess you could imagine it stretched out across the heavens, then it's got to be pretty flimsy, like my Pesach aluminum foil that was covering everything. You just pull it off. So Talmud Lomar chazakim. The pasuk says chazakim kirei mutzak. They're as strong and sturdy as a freshly poured piece of metal. Yachol shehein nisrapin. You might think that perhaps now, when God first created them, they were strong, but over the course of time and history, they would become weakened through gravity, and even a very sturdy built piece of architecture could start to sag or droop over time. Talmulomar kirei mutzak. No, that's why the pasuk in Eov tells us that continually the rakia is like a freshly poured mirror. That is to say, shebechol sha'a v'sha'a nir'in mutzakim. Every moment that you analyze the rakia, it still appears or presents as a freshly poured mirror, because it is continually, and this is one of the things that defies our understanding of celestial material. As a matter of fact, the Rambam was of the opinion, the Rambam subscribed to the philosophy of Aristotle, and he believed that the 4 elements that we encounter in our terrestrial realm are not the same elements that exist in the celestial realm. So when God creates the rakia, he creates it out of a 5th element that is not common to our existence in this world. And that's why there's a certain durability that doesn't break down like the elements here. The elements in our world, the reason why everything breaks down, plant life, animal life, and so forth, is because anytime you have a composite material that's made up of different elements, the elements eventually start to disintegrate from each other, and therefore that results in the breakdown and decomposition of the various things that are made of composite elements. But if something is truly elemental from something made from a 5th element that is not subject to, has not been integrated with other things that we encounter in our world, it can truly be durable permanently, or for all of infinity. There's another discussion that the Rambam has in the Moreh Nevuchim, where he philosophizes as to whether the world is eternal in its existence. There the Rambam has a lengthy discussion because he needs to reconcile the narrative of creation with Aristotle. And the narrative of creation is something that is anathema to Aristotle, because Aristotle believed that the world had never been created, that there is an eternity of existence that is both behind us and in front of us.
There's no starting point?
There is no eternity parte ante and eternity parte post are the two terms that are the Latin terminology of have things always existed eternally, and will things exist eternally into the future? And so Aristotle believed both, that the world has always existed as it is now, and he argued that because he did not believe that he believed in what he called a prime mover or a prime cause that is responsible for all that exists, a certain sentience that maintains existence, but that sentience, that supreme sentience, is not subject to change. And if that sentience is not subject to change, it could not have decided at one moment in time to create something from nothing. That's Aristotle's philosophy. And the Rambam spends pages upon pages upon pages disproving Aristotle on that one point, because he had such great deference and reverence of Aristotle's philosophy that he said, this is like the only thing that Aristotle didn't get right was his depiction of cosmogony, which is the term for the origins of the universe. And so we had to spend a lot of time explaining why he's not right, because it's not reconcilable with the Torah. And he goes even further and he says, if I was forced to admit that Aristotle was right because all of his proofs were accurate, I would have to have figured out a way to reread the first chapter of Genesis, because truth is truth and you have to accept the truth from wherever it originates. But because Aristotle's whole science of cosmogony is based on indirect reflection, not on scientific measurement, I can take liberty with Aristotle and say this is the one thing that he didn't get right. But what about eterne parte post? What about eternity looking forward into the future? So here is where there is a difference of opinion between the Rambam and other medieval Jewish thinkers. Other medieval Jewish thinkers believe that just like the world had a point of origin, it also has a point of conclusion. And then we go into a different realm of existence called Olam Haba. But the Rambam did not believe that. The Rambam believed that our current existence is eterne parte post, will be an eternal existence. And it certainly jives with this Gemara, because the Gemara over here seems to be saying that the Rakia has a certain eternal durability. It can last forever and ever. That doesn't necessarily commit the Gemara to subscribing to the Rambam. It's just an interesting reflection. Okay. Yes.
Does he come back in agreement with the Hacham about Mashiach and Olam Haba? Because he seems to differ about if it's going to go on. Then is it a different realm with for time of Mashiach and Olam Haba?
The Rambam has a radical view of Olam Haba. He does believe in a messianic age, but he also believes that the world will dramatically change and mankind will dramatically change at some point in the future. We will be all disembodied creatures. We no longer will be confined to the elements, to the physical elements, which seems to contradict other statements of Chazal, because Chazal say that there'll be Tchias HaMesim, a resurrection of the dead when body and soul will reunite, and then we will live eternally. So the Rambam's radical belief is that there will be Tchiat HaMetim. People will live once again for a normal lifespan, and then will die. The body will decompose, and the soul will live on for all of eternity. He took a lot of heat. It's one of the major issues that he took a lot of heat during his lifetime, to the point where shortly before he passed, he had to write a special igeret, a special letter or an essay to clarify his position. But he didn't back down. He just clarified it further. It's not like because people had accused him of denying Tchiyas HaMesim, of denying resurrection. He said, I don't deny resurrection. I just believe that everyone will be resurrected, but then they'll die again, which is not the conventional belief of Chazal. Right? So even to this day, the Rambam's opinion is not the normative accepted opinion. Okay, let's go on. Let's continue our discussion of the Rakia. Rabbi Yochanan v'Reb Shimon ben Lakish. We have a machlokas here between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish as to how to interpret that pasuk in Eov that we just read about. That Tarkia imo lishachakim, that God, you will make this Rakia into the heavens. Chazakim kiri'im mutzak, strong like a freshly poured mirror. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, benoheg sheba'olam, adam moteach ohel, al yedei shuhut chim'ah. That normally when a person spreads or pitches a tent, after a short period of time, rafeh, the tent starts to sag. Okay, it's just natural. Over the course, you pitch a tent. Who's a camper here?
Hal.
Hal. You pitch a tent. How long will a tent stay before it starts to sag?
Depends on the quality and how good you are.
Yeah.
2 days. 2 days it starts to sag.
2 days it starts to sag. Okay. All right. Biram hacha, but over here, bayim tachem ka'ohel lashavet. That we have a pasuk in Isaiah that says that God spread out the heavens like a tent that is meant to last for all time. Uchetiv, and it also says chazakim, that even though the tent has been spread out, it's strong, as we learned in Eov, and the tent never sags. In other words, so one of the things that we're marveling at in this Gemara is the durability of the heavens. You would think that over the course of millennia, things would start to sag. Just like everything else, everything starts to sag eventually. Nothing has sagged about our celestial, macro universe. To Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omar, and Reish Lakish adds, I don't think he's disagreeing, but he's just adding something else. Benohag sheba'olam adam nosech kelim al yedei shahut hu ma'aleh chaluda. A person manufactures metal from melting it and pouring it into molds and so forth. And over the course of a short period of time, the metal starts to rust. Biram hacha, but over here, kiri'i mutzak, that the rakia is like a freshly poured mirror, no matter how much time elapses. B'chol sha'a v'sha'a hinirin kisha'at yitzikatan, that at every moment through time, no matter how much time has passed over the course of history, the heavens still look like a freshly poured mirror. Okay, and Rabbi Azariah Omar al-Ha de Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and regarding this teaching of Reish Lakish, that the heavens always look new, it says, now we can understand the juxtaposition of two psukim that are found at the very beginning of the Torah. It says at the end, or at the very beginning of Perek Beis of the second chapter, Vayichlu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tziva'am, vayichal Elokim bayom hashvi'i. It says at the end of the 6 days of creation that the heavens and the earth and all of their hosts, all of their contents were completed, and God rested on the seventh day. But what does it say after God rested on the seventh day? We know this because we say it in our Kiddush, that God completed all of his work, that God rested on the seventh day from all of his work. But then the very next pasuk says, Vayivarach Elokim es Yom HaShavi'i Vayikadesh Oso, that God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Kivo Shavas Mikol Malachto, and because he rested from all of his work. But then you look at the very next pasuk, which seems to be a dramatic shift. This is what we don't say in Kiddush, but it's the very next pasuk. Eile toldos hashamayim v'haaretz b'hi bara'am. The following is the chronicling of the heavens and the earth when they were created. Biyom asos Hashem Elokim eretz b'shamayim, on the day that God created earth and heaven. And then it goes to proceed to inform us what was taking place at the time when God first created man. There was a garden, and the mist rose from the earth, and there was no one yet to tend the garden, so God placed man in the Garden of Eden. But that's not really a narrative about, this is the chronicles of the creation. Eila toldos shamayim ba'aretz v'hi bara'am. This is a chronicling of the earth and the heavens and the earth when they were created. So it seems like this pasuk seems a little bit out of place. It should have written this pasuk at the very beginning of the Torah, not at the beginning of the second chapter of the Torah. So what's the connection? Why, after God resting on the seventh day, does it say go back to Eila toldos shamayim v'aretz b'hi bara'am? These are the chronicles of heaven, of the heavens and the earth when they were created, right? After creation was already finished. Ella yom nichnas v'yom yotzei, Shabbos nichnas v'Shabbos yotzei. But rather it's coming to teach us as follows, and the Gemara is almost waxing poetically. A day comes and a day goes. A week comes and a week goes. That's what the word Shabbos here means. Chodesh nichnas v'chodesh yotzei. A month comes and a month goes. Shana nichneses v'shana yotza. A year comes and a year goes. Like sunrise, sunset, right? In other words, time marches on. Uchesiv, and yet it still says, Eila toldos hashamayim v'haaretz b'hi bara'am. Nonetheless, with every subsequent moment that continues to march on, these are the chronicles of the heavens and the earth at the time of their creation. Biyom asos Hashem Elokim eretz v'shamayim. On the self-same day that God made earth and heaven. Meaning what? Meaning that this is the story of creation in the sense that every single day that continues, even after God completed creation and time marches on, the world has the same appearance and constitution as it had on the very first day that it was created. What the Gemara is trying to describe here is a steady stateness of the world that man finds himself in. Man should not think, and again, this is, I guess, a bit of a controversial statement. Man should not think that over the course of the eons, the world has evolved and changed in any significant way. The way we find the world today is the way that it was at the time that God created heaven and earth. Now, the question, of course, is, and with that, we conclude this whole discussion, and tomorrow we're going to go back to the quote from the Mishnah to talk about, what going back to reciting Kriya Shema, and how much time you have in the evening to recite Kriya Shema. We'll see all of the different opinions. But now the question becomes, so what did the Rambam, what does the Gemara really mean by this statement? Is the Gemara saying that there's no such thing as an evolutionary process of creation? I don't think that's what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying is that once creation was completed and man entered the scene, the universe has been steady and consistent for the sake of man. But when you think about it, when you think about the cosmic clock that has been ticking from the time of the Big Bang, from the beginning of creation. The story of creation from man's perspective takes 6 days. But when you look at a clock of time, of the history of reality, creation was a process that took billions of years. And there's this tiny little sliver at the very end of this huge chart that extends for miles, and this tiny little sliver at the very end, which is the history of man. Man's history on this earth has been what? Not more than 10,000 years, or according to our calendar, 5786, right? Tiny, tiny, tiny little sliver of real human history from the time when Genesis begins and Adam and Eve walk the earth. Which means that the creation process was, for the vast majority, in other words, the first chapter of Berachos is 99.999999999% of all of the history of existence, and the 0.000001, the last little sliver, is where Adam and Eve begin. And so that's really all when you put it into that perspective, all the Gemara is saying is that that tiny, tiny little sliver of time nothing's changed. In all of that time and all of those thousands of years, but which are relatively tiny compared to the rest of the history of existence, not human history, but the history of existence.
Yeah, but Earth itself is just not even a speck of what's actually out in the universe.
And then, right, so we're talking about the chronology of just our planet. And then you'd look at the vastness of everything else that's out there. Take a look at Simi Grossman's article about extraterrestrial life and what else is out there. That was in this last issue of the Chachmei Lev journal. Okay, so we'll hold it here for today.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.